The shirt was like stuck to my body.
Dude, it's a pretty spicy weather conditions out here. Very humid. It's kind of gross. I remember the first time I came to Florida to visit you. I'll never forget that moment. I literally walked out of the plane and almost walked right back onto the plane. It was just getting hit with a heat wave, and you're like, I can't even breathe. So I am definitely not built for the south, the southeast, or the northeast, wherever there's hot weather. But an origin trip here and there, I'm okay. But that's about it. Fair enough. First time on the podcast, we have a very interesting beverage. And if you've seen the title, you probably know exactly what we have right here in the carafe. Let's just pour it and let's see where things go. I don't know. I'm scared. Beautiful. Aroma check. What's going through your nostrils?
Nice. It's like rich. Nice cherry.
I honestly think this is my Asami mug, but it straight up smells like a cup of noodles. I think that's my mug though. It's definitely not the coffee.
I mean, this reminds me of like a cherry Coke.
Cherry Coke. That sounds very delicious.
It is. Like a Mr. Pibb.
I haven't had a cherry Coke in a while. I need to snag one.
Yeah.
Pick one up on the way home.
It has a little like a rough finish. I think what you were talking about when we cupped the coffee, it's has that roast essence on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That it kind of lingers on. It takes over your entire palate.
Yeah.
So to give some context to everyone, oh gosh, my mustache. Give some context to everyone. We had some leftovers of a coffee that we just it was literally the bare leftovers, threw it in the roast, and we're like, well, why just throw this coffee away when we can just see what happens and mess with it? So we went ahead and threw in a Colombian anaerobic natural, and we really pushed this on the roast. Sergi pushed it to, what was it?
Well, it's over 20 degrees hotter than what we had dialed in.
Right.
Quite a bit.
Right. So
that won't
that's a lot.
give it much context to listeners. But,
for those who are kind of in the roasting game, once again, all these probes and numbers are very different from each other, but it was around a little over 430 degrees.
Yeah.
And it's way further than anything we've ever pushed any of our coffees, other than the seasoning roast, which when you buy a brand new roaster, you usually throw it, you literally have to burn the heck out of those beans to just season the roaster, and you pretty much end up tossing away quite a bit of coffee. But other than that, I don't think we've ever pushed the coffee this dark.
Yeah.
And I think it's very helpful because I think these are good learning experiences. It's like, it's kind of like, you can only learn so much by watching or reading or listening to podcasts or whatever it is. At some point, you're going to have to do it. And that's kind of what this feels like. It's like we know what dark roast tastes like. We know what coffee is being pushed in development feel and taste like, what we don't like and what we like about them. But I think there's still a learning experience there to be able to actually do it ourselves and see, man, this is what this coffee tastes like. It tastes like much lighter. This is what it tastes like much darker. And actually, there's a couple things that we learned about this, which today we're talking about dark roast, in case y'all didn't know. But yeah, this coffee though, this batch right here is not super horrible. Like, it's not bad. And that's also speaking from, two guys who drink predominantly light medium maybe, but mostly light roast. And it's not horrible.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. And something that really intrigued me, even in this cup, maybe because it's an anaerobic natural, you're still getting some fruity-esque qualities coming through.
Yep.
Even pushing through that really rich, dark, roasty characteristics. No,
I 100% agree. There's still a lot of flavor in this coffee.
surprisingly,
It doesn't just taste like a classic dark roast. I mean, another reference point, this did not even peak, or maybe it did, correct me if I'm wrong, peak like that oily, shiny bean.
Yeah, it was barely on the cusp. There's definitely some
yeah.
stuff in there that's shiny,
Yeah.
but it's also not like a Vienna roast. So
No.
don't think this is like really, really dark.
Yeah.
But
I don't think, from looking at the roast, I don't think I even came close to hitting second crack.
no, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
From what I remember.
Yeah.
And so it's a dark roast, but it's still not maybe that classic oily coffee that you would buy at the grocery store. Because and that's why when I say it still has flavor and I can pick up nuances like the cherry Coke thing, because it's still not that dark. That's why it's there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. Is this bad to say that I kind of miss those richer flavors in coffee?
Oh gosh.
I'm not going to say that I like always enjoy them because, the bitterness aspect and the rough aftertaste on a dark roast is kind of hard to consume. We've all had those coffees where you feel like you need something to wash your mouth out because it's so heavy and hard.
And that's why I have some water with me.
Totally.
Even though it's not that rough, it's not that bad as other dark roasts that I've had, but it definitely has this coated mouthfeel to it that it's really intense. Yeah. It's not mild, it's really intense.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, for a while before specialty coffee or, you got me.
Wrong word. All right, go back.
Yeah. For a while before I got into light roast, I drank a lot of dark roast from Starbucks, which is specialty coffee, confirming from our friend. That's another podcast, right?
You heard it there, folks. That is the fact. Those are the facts.
Yeah. I would say like I got used to drinking like Pike's Place. I got used to drinking whatever they had on espresso, which is even probably, I think, darker than Pike's Place. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then I even got used to drinking the Komodo Dragon blend from
whatever
Indonesia.
That is.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I remember being super stoked on the reserve line, and it's still fairly dark. I would say it's darker than this, the reserve line. And it was the Lake Toba coffee from Indonesia. And then when I traveled to Indonesia and went to Lake Toba, that was I literally got the origin feels on that one. That's for excellent. Starbucks.
That's excellent. Yeah.
But yeah, and I remember drinking those coffees and enjoying them. I can't believe that, but there is what I'm saying with that is there are folks with a palate for those kind of coffees.
For sure. You know? And I think, I mean, first off, before we get into the rest of the podcast, I'm just going to give it a little nod to the mirror cap. If you want to pick up a mirror cap to keep your noggin warm, even though it's spicy as heck outside, to keep your noggin warm for comfortable sake.
Yeah.
Just know we have some mirror caps on the website. Go check them out. Go pick some up. They're very sleek, low-key, minimal. It's for all you fashionistas out there.
Yeah.
We made them like something we would wear. So that's that. I don't know why this podcast needed that, but
it's a little plug.
But listen,
gotta pay the bills.
Yeah, yeah. This podcast episode is sponsored by our own caps. Alrighty, but that being said, I don't want to turn this into also. This isn't an episode about Starbucks, but I'm gonna say at some point, Bellingham had no specialty coffee whatsoever at some or. Again, such a wrong word use of the word. It had no light, very little light medium roasted coffee. And so what I resorted to back then was I actually would go and look for those reserve coffees at Starbucks with hopes that might offer some flavor. And, to a certain extent, it wasn't super horrible. It had a little bit of nuance, but still was pushing it, and I'm also really glad that you brought up the fact that like some people just have a palate for it, and 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 I'm glad we're running into the specialty coffee terminology problem, because specialty coffee is not just about roasting light or light medium.
Yeah. Yep.
Specialty coffee is so much bigger than roast level. But on the other hand, there's something special about and that alone tells us that there's a difference in how you roast it and the importance of roasting differently to bring out different qualities in the cup. And so I have no idea where I was going with that, but
I was thinking, like, you can contrast that with light roast. There's a lot of light roast that I highly dislike as well, because there's a lot of like dark roast that I dislike and light roast. They're equal, I think, for me when it comes to disliking. So it's not a matter of like all light roast is tasty and all dark roast is not tasty.
Good.
I just think the difficulty with dark roast is finding that sweet spot where it tastes, it meets the preference of dark roast, the taste preference of folks who like dark roast, which is, bigger bodied, kind of more sweetness, less acidity. A lot of the times when folks are asking for a dark roast, they literally say, do you have a coffee that's less acidic? And it hits those preferences without losing a lot of sweetness and without tasting like char.
As a little side note, Lane's just talked to Smirk.
Yeah,
Simon,
gosh,
we'll get it right someday on the pod. But he actually said that pretty much the acidity, I guess, is there's still plenty of acidity left in dark roast coffee.
That makes sense.
And that there's not much of a difference. So people who claim that are actually talking about different qualities. Yeah. Not the actual thing. There's just a lack of terminology to explain that other than calling it acidity, which doesn't necessarily contradict what you're saying. It's that same terminology is still used, and there's something in light roasted coffee that people who like dark roast are not drinking. Yeah. And there's qualities in that they're not actually enjoying that they would prefer in this. And so I agree. I'm glad you also brought up the fact that not all light roast is great. And it's we've said this before. Every time you get a new bag, get a cupping bowl and cup your coffees. And it's something that we've noticed over the years of cupping not only our coffees but also coffees from other roasting companies, and roasting companies that are very well known, are really massive crowd favorites. You'll realize that actually there's just as much of a problem of under roasting and under developing your coffee, which makes light roasted not very pleasing. Like that's actually a very prevalent and very common problem with roasters. And of course, now we're getting into preference a little bit, but this is still connected to this conversation, because dark roast is, people who enjoy that are aiming to enjoy a completely different coffee experience. And building off of the conversation that we had last week about coffee experience, that has a major aspect to do with it, and we can't just say that's either not specialty coffee, and we can't also say that it's just horrible. It's just not according to your preference, and somebody else might enjoy that kind of experience.
Yeah, or folks or in roasting companies that have a dark roast on the menu doesn't mean they're less qualified roasters or roasting companies.
100%,
just because they offer a coffee that's a little more developed and darker in color.
Yeah.
So because there is a preference, and we, at least for us, we know that we want to honor as many preferences as possible. We can't honor all of them. Like, what I mean? It's almost impossible to, or maybe honor is not the right word. We can't please every single taste preference. I mean, we just don't have that kind of a big of a menu. Yeah. And that's very difficult to do.
Right.
But we can have that as a consideration. Like, folks like coffees that are pretty all over the spectrum of flavor preferences. And then within that, understanding that there's other roasting companies that have fairly developed coffees. And then they also have very light coffees. And I actually think that's pretty cool. I remember you and I were talking about, what's that roasting company? Tired Eyes? No. Was it Tired Eyes that had a darker developed coffee? Yeah. And we were talking about, like, is it even worth roasting a coffee that dark with a declining ROR that we talk about? Yeah. And This coffee was roasted with a declining ROR.
It was pretty tasty, not gonna lie.
it was still a good curve,
Yeah.
and it is dark. And like we were just trying it right now, it still has a lot of that nuances that we like in regular coffees, with the flavor preference of a dark roast.
All right, so we're gonna. I think there's a couple ways that I think I want to move on with this. And, I want to ask you, what are some of the qualities that you actually like in, for example, in this cup right here, that you won't get in a light roast, and then we can talk about why, a little bit of why we don't. What we don't like about it, and how obviously everything that we roast is more on the much lighter spectrum. So, and then I'm also very curious. I want to actually also talk about like why I think it might be a good idea and potential something that we should put that on the radar in the future for Mir. But we'll leave that off for the. But tell me, like, what are you enjoying out of this? I know we brought up a couple things. What are you enjoying in this, but also enjoying in general from like a darker roast? So we're not talking about like insane far out there roasts like Vienna. We're talking just a really good, solid, developed coffee.
This coffee specifically, because I've had it light and I've had it dark, what I like this in contrast to the other roasts is it's a little fuller, if that makes sense. Like, I hate using again the term of like body in this conversation, but it's a little like a thicker coffee. It's got a bigger punch when it comes to it's so hard to explain, because I'm like thinking about all the other words I could use for light roast as well that would also say that, but there's a whole different experience when it comes to the body and the weight of the coffee in your mouth, which I like. You know, you don't always get to experience this with a medium even roasted coffee. That would be the main thing. But then also the flavor transformation, like these flavors are darker, if that makes any sense. Yeah. They are. And so they have a completely different profile than when we had it on light roast. We were tasting, what were the flavors? Pear. And now it's really transformed, like I said, like a cherry Coke kind of essence, which, I like. It's not bad. You know what I mean? I enjoy it for what it is. I don't know if I could drink this every day. Yeah.
So, fair enough. Yeah. And by that question, I'm not necessarily saying like why you would, or because I think there's still some solid things like that I'm picking up in this cup that I need to be able to. I need to acknowledge those things, you know. And something I do enjoy out of this is that richer, thicker body that you're getting that you probably would not get out of a much, much lighter roast. And that's one of the things that you do when you roast darker. You're going to get a thicker, syrupy body. It's going to linger around in your mouth for much longer. I actually would probably guarantee that this is probably going to taste way better if you add a splash of milk in there than our lighter roast. Yeah. And there's something to say for that, you know? Yeah. And so, but I'm also on board. Like, I also actually, I'm pretty pumped about this dark roast because, what I told you like the other day, that you can actually taste some of the fruit that's kicking through. And I think that's a decent segue as to why we don't roast so dark is because I think a lot of the times when you push it this far, you're losing some of the volatile flavors or the smaller nuances. The nuances. Yeah. Totally. Even though this, I'm actually pumped that I'm still getting some fruit in it. I'm still getting some sweetness through it. It's not just, if you completely scorch a bagel, all you're tasting is that like black burnt char flavor. Even though there is a roasty aspect to this, it's shockingly how much the fruit cuts through, which is kind of strange. You don't really think about that when, people in our kind of niche.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also great, the fact that we've tasted it light. So it's giving us that, not preference. What's the word I'm looking for? It's giving us that contrast and point of view to be able to look back and be like, how did this coffee change when it went darker? And I think that's that's very helpful as roasters. That's super helpful, and you covered that already in the beginning. And I think when it comes to distinguishing like preference within that, I'm like, oh, yeah, I can dig this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This isn't as bad as I think I envision it in my mind being just like super harsh, almost unpleasant. And I'm finding some like pleasure in drinking this, you know? So I say it's a very good experiment, very good learning experience for me.
For sure. Give us your take. Why would you choose a light roast coffee over, say, a dark roast?
Gosh, man, you're putting me on the spot with that one. I mean, it's an easy answer, but I also don't want it to come off as like, again, light roast is better. I taste way more nuance in a light roasted coffee. So those flavor notes that are on the bag all the time, I taste more of those in the light roasted version of this coffee versus the one we're drinking right now. So there's more quote unquote complexity in the cup. There's more exciting things that are going on. So that's that's the main thing why I enjoy coffees that are roasted lighter.
Yeah. And once again, I for sure didn't mean to say like why light roast is, is better, like universally speaking.
Superior,
it's more like there's a reason why we roast coffees lighter on the lighter side of the spectrum. There's a reason why I would choose that over any dark roast any day on the shelf. I'm going to snag, and I agree with you. Like a lot of times, the dark roast muddles out those flavors and it lacks nuance. And sometimes, dark roast is hefty bad that you need some creamer in there. And I'm going to confess, I sometimes dump a little creamer in there and just to add it, give it that sweetness and the nuance that you're missing. But yeah, I think lighter roast just, and once again, it's so hard to say just lighter roast because I'm like thinking of all the underdeveloped vegetal green coffees I've roasted.
This is a tough conversation to have.
And lighter roast coffees, you can get some really bad stuff in there. And I understand why people don't like lighter roast. But I think there's the opportunity cost and the potential of roasting lighter and maybe getting it wrong is much greater than roasting darker.
Yes.
And that's why we sit on that side of the spectrum. Yeah. Is because we believe that if you just curate the roast on the lighter side, there's a potential that you might strike gold and you're like, wow, this is incredible. Yeah. As opposed to something darker, that range is much more bigger. Yeah. Like, and the darker you go, you're probably not going to strike gold the way that was. And by gold, I'm also speaking from my preference and what I enjoy. So,
yeah. This is a complicated conversation.
Yeah, it's a lot more weirder to talk about than what I thought we were talking about like 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I can see a lot of folks listening or watching and be like, but what about this and stuff like that, which I get it. This is a complicated conversation. Yeah. Also, like, chime in, let us know. You know what I mean? We want to talk about it too.
Send us some disagreements in the comments. Yeah. I'm scared. Yeah. I feel more sweaty now.
Yeah, exactly. That's like for sure. I remember that one time when we went to Rainier and there was that little cafe in the lodge.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was definitely dark roast, but we all still ordered milk drinks and totally fine. Yes. Like I still drank it. Like, of course, I know what it is, like, and I'm not offended by it. I enjoyed it with a little bit of milk, I think it was a little 12 ounce. That was their smallest drink. Yeah. Totally fine, and coffee cut through in the milk. Had that rich body. Nice. I went for it.
Yeah.
And it is what it is for where we were.
Yeah. Do you think that what are some of the reasons why we would entertain not going full dark roast as dark as this, but in that direction of the spectrum?
Yeah. I think there's from a green buying, especially as we develop more deeper relationships with our coffee farmers and producers, there will be a time when a coffee won't taste like the previous year or as good or will level up to that quality standard.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that we can still serve our guests well or people who buy our coffee and honor the farmer, we could roast it a little darker. I don't know if we'll ever go to anything this dark, maybe, but definitely there is room to go like a little bit darker just to make the coffee a whole different experience without just getting rid of it. You know what I mean? Or even creating like a possibility we talked about, a blend. Yeah. And, blends tend to work better when they are roasted on the darker side, just because the two coffees can mix better together rather than under extracting and over extracting another one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that would be a big one. And then at the end of the day, it's all about providing a better experience for our, I want to say guests, drinkers. But that might not be the best word.
Coffee lovers,
coffee drinkers.
Yeah.
People who purchase our coffee.
And I'm glad that you brought that up about the coffee farmer and producer. I didn't think you'd go there, but I think even then the point is to provide something tasty.
Right.
A powerful experience at home behind your coffee bar. And yeah, some coffees on the lighter side, sometimes you actually have to pull development on them to get them to shine where we believe personally, according to our preference and palates, where we believe they taste best. And that may not be in the light range. That may not be in the light medium, but it could be in the medium.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree. Yeah. I'm also very intrigued, still very puzzled. This blew my expectations. I don't remember last time I had a dark roast, but the fact that there's so much fruit coming out of here, there's of course a lot of harshness also that I'm not enjoying, but it's really got me thinking like that's like 430, pushing 430, and we're roasting like 20 degrees lighter than that. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, that's a huge gap.
It is, yeah.
And what if there is something very intriguing somewhere in the middle that doesn't have to be harsh or displeasing, but can also have some fruit cutting through that might be interesting? Like what you're saying, whether that's, treating the coffee drinker better with a specific coffee pushing development, or, the concept of like an espresso roast, or, coffees for like cold brew or whatever, or something like that. Like, I don't know. There's something interesting that this little test run, just got me thinking about. Yeah. Which, I don't know.
Yeah, because then again, for someone who's brewing just on a batch brew and they're not measuring anything, just scooping in some coffee, I think it's a much easier brewing experience with dark roast than with the under extracted like light roast. You know what I mean? There's a way more give with a dark roast. So that is again a very good service. So we got to consider that. I mean, it's hard to talk about that and think about, is that a possibility? Because it's so outside of our common everyday coffee experience. But
it's taboo.
Yeah, it's good to talk about.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, folks, please give us some comments, some feedback on this episode. I'm scared, but please, I want to initiate, a solid, healthy conversation around this, because I don't think we talk about this very often in the industry. So drop a comment. Only positive reviews on the podcast, please. don't give us a thumbs down from this episode. But hopefully this was intriguing and interesting. Thank you so much for listening, watching, whatever you're doing, wherever you're tuning in. But like always, friends, remember, reflect what's good.